Before we begin this story, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below, and let us know how far Aspen Ridge's light can reach. If you believe in healing, second chances, and the bond that never breaks between a person and their dog, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories that remind us that no matter how dark it gets, there's always a light waiting to be found. The road to Aspen Ridge twisted through a valley of silence, the kind that only snow could make. Every mile pulled Emma Hale further from the noise of the world she was trying to forget. The wind swept low across the hood of her truck, carrying the faint howl of the coming storm. The headlights carved two narrow tunnels through the flurries, and beyond them, only darkness waited. Balto sat in the passenger seat, his thick silver-gray fur gleaming in the dim light. His icy blue eyes followed the road ahead, calm but alert, as if he already knew where they were going. Emma's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Her knuckles were pale from the cold and from something deeper memory. She hadn't been back to Aspen Ridge in more than 15 years. The last time she left, she had been 19, angry at a world that had already taken too much. Her father's sudden death, her mother's collapse into silence, the feeling of being invisible in a town too small to hold her pain. All of it had driven her toward the army, toward noise, chaos, and purpose. But now, after a decade of service as a field medic and the loss of her husband in Kabul, she had nothing left to run from except herself. The storm thickened as the road climbed. Her truck groaned under the weight of the snow, tires slipping on frozen gravel. She slowed, eyes narrowing as a wooden sign appeared through the haze. Aspen Ridge, elevation 8200. Beneath it, a smaller one pointed toward Hale Cabin Road. She almost laughed at the sight. The name looked smaller now, worn down by wind and years, like everything else that had belonged to her family. When she finally reached the turnoff, she stopped the engine. For a moment, there was only the whisper of falling snow. The world was still. Emma leaned her head back against the seat, closed her eyes and breathed. The air smelled of pine and frost, clean enough to hurt. Balto gave a low whine, nudging her arm. "Yeah," she murmured. "We're home." She stepped out of the truck. The cold hit like a wall, sharp and honest. Her boots crunched through the snow as she walked toward the shadowed outline of the cabin at the edge of the clearing. It was smaller than she remembered, its roof sagging under years of storms. The porch railing hung crooked, and the windows were blind with frost. Yet beneath the ruin, there was something, steady something, that still belonged to her. Balto bounded ahead, his paws silent in the snow. He circled the porch once, then stopped at the door, tail wagging once as if giving permission. Emma smiled faintly. "Lead the way, soldier." She reached for the handle. It was cold to the touch, stiff with rust, but it turned. The door creaked open, breathing out a draft of stale air and dust. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood, ash, and forgotten time. The furniture was still there, a stone fireplace, a table scarred with knife marks, two chairs her father had built by hand. Cobwebs hung from the rafters like gray lace. The silence pressed around her, heavy but not unfriendly. It was the kind of silence that remembered laughter, the kind that waited to be broken. Balto padded in first, nose to the floor, tail low but steady. His breath fogged in the cold air as he moved from room to room, sniffing corners, testing the air, mapping the ghosts. Emma followed, her boots echoing softly. Every step felt like stepping through a memory. She could still see her father sitting by the fire, boots off, sharpening his old hunting knife. She could hear her own laughter, a child's voice echoing through the beams, and her mother's soft humming in the kitchen before grief swallowed her whole. Emma brushed her gloved fingers along the wall. The pine boards were rough, dry, but strong. "You held up," she whispered. "Better than I did." When she reached the fireplace, she found a small tin box resting on the mantel. A thin layer of dust coated the lid. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside lay a folded letter, the paper yellowed and fragile. Her breath caught when she recognized the handwriting her father's. She sat by the fire pit, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. "Emma, if you're reading this, I guess the house waited for you, like I knew it would. Don't run from what made you. This place isn't about walls or wood. It's about coming back when the world breaks you. The house will always stand as long as you do. If you stay, don't try to make it new. Just make it alive again. Dad! The words blurred as her eyes filled. She hadn't cried in years. In war zones, tears were useless. Here, they were the only honest language left. Balto pressed his head against her shoulder, silent, solid, breathing with her. She wiped her face and laughed softly. You'd have liked him, she whispered. He used to say dogs were God's way of reminding us someone still believes we're worth saving. She stood and began unpacking. There wasn't much, just some canned food, a blanket, an old lantern, a sleeping bag, and her husband's dog tags, which she hung on a nail near the door. She struck a match and lit the lantern. The flame caught slowly, bathing the room in a soft, golden glow. Shadows danced across the walls, chasing away the gray. Outside, the storm built strength, wind howling through the trees like a chorus of old prayers. Inside, warmth grew, faint but real. Emma found the woodpile her father had kept under the porch, still dry beneath the snow. She built a fire. The first crackle of flame was small, hesitant, but soon it filled the room with the scent of pine resin and smoke. Balto lay down by the hearth, curling into himself, his tail brushing his nose. His ears twitched at the wind, but his eyes were calm, reflecting the firelight like two shards of blue ice. Emma sat beside him, legs folded, watching the flames climb higher. She thought of the life she had left behind, the desert sun, the endless hum of helicopters, the faces of soldiers she couldn't save, and the one man she couldn't bring back. Her husband, Luke, had died in her arms 3 years ago, whispering her name as the medevac circled too far away. Since then, silence had followed her everywhere. But tonight, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like rest. She looked around the cabin, the rough beams, the old photographs faded on the shelf, the knife marks on the table where her father used to cut bread. Nothing here was perfect. Everything was scarred, but it was real. Emma reached out, running her hand through Balto's fur. We'll fix it, boy, she said quietly. One board, one nail, one breath at a time. The dog sighed, half asleep, his body warm against her knee. Outside, the wind roared across the ridge, but the house stood firm, the old walls creaking softly as if exhaling after a long wait. The flames flickered, painting gold across the wooden walls, and for the first time in years, Emma didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was home. As midnight passed, the storm deepened. Snow blanketed the valley, thick and soundless. Through the window, the world glowed faintly under the moonlight, a sea of white stretching forever. Emma stood at the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Behind her, Balto slept, his paws twitching in dreams. She placed her hand against the pane, feeling the cold seep through. Dad, she whispered, I came back. The wind answered, low and mournful, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. Somewhere in that sound, she could almost hear his voice again, calm and steady. You did good, Em. She smiled, just barely. The fire cracked, and in that fragile, golden quiet, a woman and her dog watched the snow fall on Aspen Ridge. Two souls breathing in time, waiting for morning. The morning after the storm was pale and heavy with quiet. The mountains of Aspen Ridge stood buried under layers of fresh snow, the kind that made the world look peaceful from a distance, but demanded strength from those who lived within it. Inside the cabin, the fire had died to embers, and thin light seeped through the frosted windows. Emma Hale stirred awake under a wool blanket, her body sore from days of travel and work, but her heart calmer than it had been in years. Balto lay by the hearth, his head resting on his paws, the slow rise and fall of his breathing, the only rhythm in the room. When Emma rose, he lifted his head, tail brushing once against the floor, his blue eyes watching her every move, as if to make sure she was still there. She made coffee on the small gas stove, the bitter scent filling the air, mixing with smoke and pine. Outside, the world was silent, except for the faint creak of trees bending beneath snow. Emma opened the cabin door and stepped out into the white. The cold bit her cheeks, sharp and clean. She filled her lungs and exhaled, watching her breath curl away like ghosts she no longer feared. The cabin's roof sagged on one corner, the porch railing half broken, and one of the shutters hung loose. She looked around, squinting at the distant hills that framed the valley. It was still her father's land, untamed, stubborn, and breathtaking. She decided to start with the roof. For hours she worked with her gloves stiff from frost, hammer echoing across the ridge. Balto followed her from one end to the other, leaping over snow piles and watching with quiet patience. Each nail she drove into the wood felt like stitching a wound that had been open for too long. By noon, sweat mingled with the chill, and she paused to rest, sitting on the steps with Balto beside her. His fur glimmered under the gray light, and when she leaned down to press her forehead against his, she whispered, "We're getting there, boy." Little by little. Later, she drove into town for supplies. Aspen Ridge was still small, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business but pretended not to. The general store sat at the corner of Main and Maple, its sign crooked, its windows fogged. As she entered, the bell above the door jingled weakly. The warmth hit her, along with the familiar smell of sawdust, coffee, and old paper. A few locals looked up from their shopping, curiosity flickering in their eyes. A stranger in uniform boots and a heavy parka was rare here, but Emma ignored the stares and walked toward the counter. Behind it stood an older man with weathered skin, a beard streaked white, and eyes the color of steel. He wore a flannel shirt and a veteran's cap faded almost to gray. When he saw her, his brows lifted slightly. "Well, I'll be," he said, voice deep and gravelly. "Didn't think I'd see a Hale in this store again." Emma paused. "You knew my father?" The man nodded. "Ben Wallace. We served different wars. Same ghosts. He used to come by every fall for coffee and to talk about fixing that cabin of his." "Guess that didn't happen." She managed a faint smile. "I'm trying to finish what he started." Ben studied her for a moment, something kind surfacing beneath his gruffness. "You've got his eyes," he said softly, "and the same stubbornness. He'd be proud you came back." He handed her a thermos and some nails from the counter. "This storm season's been mean. You'll need these more than cash." Emma tried to pay anyway, but he waved her off. "You pay me when the thaw comes if the mountain lets you." That night, the wind returned with a vengeance. The snow came sideways, thick and relentless, turning the air into a white wall. The cabin moaned under its weight, beams creaking, windows shuddering. Emma sat by the fire, listening, her pulse quickening. Balto paced near the door, uneasy, his fur bristling. Then he froze, ears pricked, eyes locked toward the forest. He growled, low in warning. Emma stood. "What is it?" she whispered. But the answer came not from him, but from beyond the storm, a faint cry. It was small, broken, almost lost in the wind. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and flashlight. "Stay close," she told Balto. They pushed into the blizzard, snow biting their faces, the beam of light cutting through the white chaos like a fragile blade. The cry came again, closer now, desperate. Balto bolted ahead, his dark shape barely visible in the storm. Emma followed, her boots sinking deep, lungs burning. The world shrank to the circle of light and the dog's shadow leading her through it. Finally she saw it, a flicker of metal under snow, the glint of a car door half buried in the drift. The windshield was shattered, steam hissing faintly from beneath the hood. Balto barked once, sharp and urgent, then leapt toward the open driver's side. Emma stumbled forward and peered in. Inside was a young woman, maybe late 20s, her face pale and bloodied. A small girl clinging to her, eyes wide with silent terror. The woman looked up weakly. "Please, help her," she whispered. "I've got you," Emma said, her voice firm despite the cold. She wrapped her arms around the child first, pulling her free, then reached back for the mother. Balto stood guard, his body blocking the wind, tail stiff, ears flat. It took all of Emma's strength to carry them both back to the cabin. Her muscles screamed, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but she kept moving, step after step through the storm, guided by Balto's bark ahead of her like a heartbeat in the white void. When they finally reached the cabin, she kicked the door open and stumbled inside. The heat from the fire hit her like salvation. She laid the woman and child near the hearth, stripped off their wet coats, and covered them with blankets. The little girl trembled violently, lips blue. Emma poured hot water into a cup, added sugar, and held it to the child's mouth. "Sip slowly," she whispered. The girl obeyed, tiny hands gripping the cup. Her mother coughed, tears streaming down her face. "We got caught in the snow. I thought the road was clear." "I'm Lily," she said weakly. Emma nodded. "You're safe now. I'm Emma. This is Balto." The child's eyes shifted toward the dog, who sat close, head tilted, watching her quietly. After a long pause, she reached out a small hand and touched his fur. Balto didn't move, only blinked, letting her feel his warmth. Her voice came out in a whisper, thin and trembling. "He's beautiful." Emma smiled, her throat tightening. "Yeah," she said softly. "He's the bravest soul I know." Hours passed before the storm began to ease, the cabin filled with the crackle of fire and the slow rhythm of breathing. Lily fell asleep against the wall, exhaustion overtaking her. While the little girl Maddie, as Emma later learned, curled beside Balto, her small fingers tangled in his fur. Emma sat nearby, staring into the flames, every nerve still alive with adrenaline. She thought about how easily life could vanish, how quickly one wrong turn could bury you in snow and silence. But tonight, she had done something that mattered again. Balto lifted his head, looking at her with eyes that reflected the firelight like two mirrors of blue glass. She reached out, brushing her hand over his neck. "You saved them," she whispered. "You always know when someone's lost." The dog sighed, a deep sound that seemed almost human. When dawn finally came, the storm was gone. The sky blushed pale gold over the ridges, and the snow glittered like crushed glass. Inside, warmth clung to the air. Lily stirred awake, eyes red but alive. Maddie sat cross-legged beside Balto, tracing shapes in his fur and whispering to him as if telling secrets. For the first time in years, Emma felt something inside her shift, a quiet warmth she hadn't known since before the war. It wasn't joy yet, but it was hope, fragile and trembling like light over snow. And as she poured fresh coffee into 3 mugs, she looked at the 2 strangers she had brought in from the storm and realized that maybe, just maybe, the mountain had sent them to save her too. The morning after the storm broke open like a slow confession, the valley shimmered under sunlight, each branch and roof edge coated with delicate crystals of ice. The air was sharp but gentle, a quiet that no longer felt empty but sacred. Inside the cabin, the smell of coffee and warm bread mingled with the sound of laughter, soft, hesitant laughter, but real. Lily was sitting near the fireplace, her leg bandaged and resting on a stool. Maddie leaned against Balto, drawing with a piece of charcoal on scrap paper, her small tongue caught between her lips in concentration. Emma watched them from the kitchen corner as she poured coffee into mismatched mugs. For the first time since she'd arrived, the house didn't feel like a place of ghosts. It felt lived in. Lily looked up and smiled. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, accepting the cup Emma handed her. "You already saved our lives." Emma shrugged lightly. "Coffee's the least I can do." She sat down across from her, the steam rising between them. "How's the leg?" "Better," Lily said. "Hurts less today." She looked around the cabin, eyes soft. "This place, it's beautiful. It feels like it remembers people." Emma followed her gaze. The sunlight filtered through the window, touching the wooden walls, the photos, the rough table her father once built. "It does remember," she said quietly. "My dad used to say wood never forgets kindness." After breakfast, Lily told her everything. How she had packed the car in the middle of the night, how Maddie had clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit while she drove through the dark, how she hadn't meant to come this way but took a wrong turn that saved their lives. Her husband had been cruel, controlling, angry, unpredictable. When she finally left, she didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay. Emma listened in silence, the ache in her chest tightening with every word. She knew that kind of fear, the kind that doesn't bruise the body, but breaks the soul. Later that afternoon, Ben Wallace arrived. His pickup rumbled into the clearing, kicking up powdery snow. When he stepped out carrying a toolbox, He looked at Emma's guests and nodded politely. Heard you found some trouble in the storm, he said. Emma smiled faintly. More like they found me. Ben's gaze shifted to Lily, then to Maddie, who peeked at him from behind Balto's tail. Looks like they were meant to, he said, his voice softer than usual. He opened his toolbox and looked around the cabin. You planning to keep living here? Yeah, Emma said, but it's falling apart. Then we'll fix it, Ben replied simply. For days they worked together. Emma cleared snow off the roof while Ben replaced old beams. Lily, though still limping, helped patch the windows with fabric. Maddie played outside with Balto, their laughter echoing across the frozen trees. In those moments, the mountain felt alive again. Emma could almost hear her father's voice in the crackle of the fire, in the creak of the floorboards beneath her boots. One evening, while the fire burned low and Ben cleaned his tools, Emma unfolded her father's old letter again. She read the last line aloud. Don't make it new. Make it alive again. Ben looked up from the workbench. That sounds like him, he said quietly. He believed in fixing what's worth keeping, even when it hurts. Emma nodded slowly. Maybe he was talking about more than this house. Ben gave her a small smile. He usually was. That night, as the snow began to fall again, Emma sat by the fire with Lily and Maddie. Maddie was tracing her finger across Balto's collar, fascinated by the brass tag. Balto, she read carefully. Why did you name him that? Emma smiled faintly. He came with that name. I found him overseas. He was a rescue dog in the field hospital. When everything went wrong, he was the one who found people under rubble. The locals called him Balto because he never gave up. Maddie's eyes widened. Like the storybook Husky who saved people in the snow. Emma nodded. Exactly like that. The little girl pressed her face into Balto's fur. He's a hero. Emma looked at the dog, his ears perked, his eyes half closed in peace. Yeah, she whispered. He is. The next morning, Ben returned with a stack of wood and a weathered blueprint. Found this in my shed, he said, laying it on the table. It was old, the ink faded, but the title was still legible. The Aspen Ridge Haven Project, 1983. Beneath it were detailed drawings of cabins, a workshop, and gardens. Your dad and I talked about building something like this, Ben said. A place for veterans and families who needed rest. We never got to finish it. Emma ran her fingers across the paper. He wanted to build a haven. Ben nodded. Guess that dream was waiting for you. For a long time, Emma said nothing. She felt something inside her shift, something steady and clear. The house, the storm, the people who had come to her door, it wasn't chance. Maybe it was the mountain's way of giving her a mission again. She looked at Lily, who was watching quietly, eyes glistening with unshed tears. A shelter, Lily whispered, for people like us. Emma looked up, meeting Ben's eyes. Then let's finish what they started. That day marked the beginning of something new. They worked together every morning, sawing, hammering, clearing paths. Lily began helping with the design, adding ideas for rooms where women and children could stay. Ben called old friends from town who still owed him favors. Slowly, word spread, and a few locals came up to lend a hand. Maddie became the soul of the place, her laughter constant, her drawings of mountains and dogs pinned on the walls. One afternoon, she handed Emma a crumpled paper. On it was a drawing of the cabin surrounded by trees and people. Above it, in shaky letters, were the words, Home for Hearts. Emma knelt, eyes stinging. This is beautiful, Maddie, she said softly. It's what this place is. Maddie smiled shyly. You fix people, not just houses. That night, while everyone slept, Emma stepped outside. The stars burned clear and close over the ridge, and the air hummed with quiet life. Balto stood beside her, tail swaying gently. He sniffed the wind, then dug at a patch of snow near the porch. Emma laughed. What did you find this time? She knelt beside him and brushed away the snow until something metal caught the light. It was a small, tarnished medal, her father's old service medal, the one she thought had been lost years ago. She turned it over in her palm, the engraved name still faintly visible. A tear slid down her cheek, but this time it wasn't sorrow, it was gratitude. She looked down at Balto. You found it, boy, she whispered. You found what I needed. The mountain wind swept through the pines and the sound was almost like a sigh. Emma closed her eyes, the metal warm in her hand, and for the first time in her life, she felt the house breathing with her, alive again, not as a memory of what was lost, but as a promise of what could still be built. Spring came quietly to Aspen Ridge, like a prayer answered after a long silence. The snow melted in slow, silver streams that wound down through the pines and gathered in small pools near the cabin. The ground, once frozen and lifeless, began to breathe again. Green shoots pierced through the damp earth, and the air smelled of pine sap and sunlight. Emma Hale stood outside the cabin, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a hammer in one hand, a clipboard in the other. Her cheeks were flushed with color and purpose. Around her, the sound of laughter echoed through the valley lily, and a few volunteers painting the porch railings. Maddie running barefoot through the grass. Balto chasing her with easy joy. The cabin, once broken and gray, now looked alive. The wood polished, windows gleaming, the front steps lined with flower boxes built from leftover planks. What had started as one woman's retreat from the world had become a refuge for many. The sign above the door now read, Aspen Ridge Haven, carved carefully by Ben Wallace himself. He still came every morning, his truck rumbling up the path, his voice gruff, but his eyes softer than ever. The project had grown beyond their imagining. Locals brought supplies, food, furniture, and stories. Veterans stopped by on weekends to help with repairs or to sit quietly on the porch, watching the mountains and remembering what peace felt like. Emma's days were full again, not with chaos or duty, but with the rhythm of rebuilding. She no longer woke to the echoes of war, but to the sound of hammers, laughter, and the steady breathing of Balto beside her bed. One morning, the mail truck wound its way up the ridge and stopped by the gate. The driver waved as he handed her a plain brown envelope, stamped with a seal she hadn't seen in years. It bore the insignia of the United States Army Medical Corps. Emma stood still, her fingers tightening around the paper. Inside was a letter, short and formal, inviting her to return as an instructor at the Army's Field Medic Training Program in Texas. It promised reinstatement, benefits, security. She read it twice, her heart heavy with a pull she thought she'd buried. She walked inside and set the letter on the table, staring at it while the fire crackled softly. Balto watched her, ears tilted, sensing her unrest. "What do you think, boy?" she murmured. "Go back or stay?" He stood, padded over, and rested his head against her knee, eyes calm and knowing. She stroked his fur, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "Yeah," she whispered. "That's what I thought." Later that afternoon, Lily joined her on the porch, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You look like someone just asked you to move a mountain," she said, half teasing. Emma handed her the letter. Lily read it slowly, then looked up. "They want you back." Emma nodded. "They think I still belong to that world." Lily's gaze softened. "You gave enough to that world. Maybe now it's time to belong to this one." Emma didn't answer, but the words stayed with her. The next morning, Ben came by with lumber and saw her sitting by the fire, lost in thought. He poured himself coffee before speaking. "Let me guess," he said. "The Army came knocking." Emma glanced at him, surprised. "How did you know?" Ben chuckled. "They always come knocking when you finally stop waiting for them." He sat down opposite her, the firelight painting deep lines across his face. "I turned them down once too," he said. "After Vietnam, they wanted me to train mechanics. I almost went. But then I looked around and realized I'd been building machines all my life. Maybe it was time to build people instead." His words settled over her like a blanket. That afternoon, clouds rolled in from the west, heavy with spring rain. The volunteers finished early and went home, leaving the ridge quiet again. Emma stayed behind to secure the garden tarp before the downpour began. She looked up as the first drops fell, soft and warm, tapping against her skin. Balto barked and ran in circles, tongue lolling, chasing the raindrops. She laughed, shaking her head, but the laughter turned into tears she hadn't expected. Standing in the rain, she realized she didn't need the Army's call to feel whole again. She already had a mission to heal, to build, to keep this light burning for others who had lost their way. That evening, Lily and Maddie came inside with wet coats and wide smiles. The storm had passed quickly, leaving behind a rainbow that arched across the valley like a bridge between two worlds. Emma lit the fire, and the three of them sat together while Balto stretched on the rug, his fur drying in the glow. Maddie leaned against Emma and whispered, "Do you think the rainbow means the sky's happy now?" Emma smiled. "Maybe it means the sky forgave the rain." The child nodded thoughtfully and closed her eyes, drifting into sleep. Later, after putting Maddie to bed, Emma stepped outside again. The air was cool and sweet. Down below, lights from town twinkled faintly, distant but comforting. Behind her, the cabin glowed like a beacon, its windows golden against the night. She heard footsteps and turned to see Ben standing on the porch, hands in his pockets. "So?" he said quietly. "What's your answer?" Emma looked out at the horizon. "I already gave it," she said. "I'm staying." Ben nodded, his smile hidden beneath his beard. "Your dad would have liked that." He turned to go, then added, "You did good, kid." When the night deepened, Emma sat on the steps with Balto beside her. Fireflies flickered across the field, their tiny lights weaving through the grass like living stars. The air hummed with crickets and the soft rustle of leaves. She rested her hand on Balto's neck. "We made it, boy," she whispered. "We found the light again." Balto looked up, his blue eyes catching the reflection of the porch lantern. In them, she saw everything: the house, the people they'd saved, the peace they'd built. The dog pressed closer, and together they watched the valley breathe under the silver moon. The following weeks passed in warmth and motion. The haven became a community. Lily began teaching art therapy to children from town. Ben organized carpentry lessons for veterans. The laughter of women and the voices of children filled the rooms once haunted by silence. Emma spent her days tending the garden and her nights writing letters to families of soldiers, offering words she once needed herself. Balto grew slower with age, his muzzle now dusted with white, but he still moved with purpose, greeting every new visitor with a gentle nudge, a reminder that they were home. One evening, the townspeople gathered for the dedication of Aspen Ridge Haven. A small plaque was mounted by the door, engraved with simple words, "Built by hands that healed." As everyone stood around the fire pit, Emma spoke quietly, her voice carrying through the dusk. "This place isn't about walls. It's about the people who walk through them. It's for anyone who's ever felt lost, for anyone searching for a reason to believe again. You are the reason this light stays on." The crowd was silent for a moment, then Ben raised his cup. "To the ones who came home," he said, "and to those still finding the way." When night fell, Emma lingered outside long after the others had gone. The mountains loomed dark and steady, the stars spilling over their peaks. The cabin's lights glowed behind her, soft and warm, like a living heart beating against the night. Balto lay at her feet, eyes half closed, tail thumping lazily. She whispered a small prayer, not for miracles, but for gratitude, for survival, for second chances, for peace. And as the wind moved gently through the pines, carrying the scent of rain and wood smoke, Emma knew that she had finally kept her father's promise. The house was alive again. The mountain was home. The light had returned.